Hello, my name is Bill Chesnut. I'm a Azure MVP. I'm a principal consultant for Mexia based out of Melbourne, Australia. And so basically, I've been working with integration technologies probably for the last 20 years. So I started a lot of stuff early on in just code. Been working with BizTalk for the last 12 years. Been working with the Azure, different Azure technologies for about the last 3 years. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the API apps and logic apps that they went into preview in about the March timeframe this year. And they're getting ready actually to re-release the preview. They're changing some things. And the interesting thing was that I got ready to run through the demo last night and they've changed a bunch of stuff on me. So we'll hope that everything holds together for the demo. They're about halfway through doing the changes they want to do, and I'll talk to those changes when we get in. So what we're going to first look at is the Azure App Services. We're going to then look at the API app component of that, which as of when I tested it last night is gone. And I'll explain to you what they did to that. Then we'll look at the actual logic app. And then I've got some tips and tricks to get started, and then just a little bit of a summary. So integration in the Microsoft space has a fairly long history. I started my integration work with Visual Basic, C#, mostly C++, a bit of SQL. Did a lot of work in SSIS and things like that. So that's where it comes from. Then in 2000, they released BizTalk Server. The first two versions of BizTalk Server were fairly rough and ready. They used Visio as the orchestration designer and a bunch of other tools. 2004, they brought the BizTalk into the Visual Studio side of things, so it became a first-class citizen from the development point of view. Then about 4 years ago now, I think, or 5, they released the first cut of the Azure. And there was a BizTalk Services in that first cut of Azure. Had nothing really to do with BizTalk, but it was some services that they were trying to leverage. They changed the name shortly thereafter to .NET Services, added a little bit to that. And then about 2.5 years ago, they brought out the BizTalk Services, which was their first real PaaS offering around integration. It's still running. It was primarily targeted at the EDI market in the US. So when they first shipped, it shipped only with the X12 EDI technology, which is US. They didn't have the EDIFACT in there yet. They did that on the first kind of service release they did of that. And then about in March, they released the Azure App Services. And that's basically a big change to the way they're looking at integration in Azure, and we'll talk about that. So one of the reasons that we're really interested in the Azure side of things is that integration is becoming more and more a hybrid beast, because we now have users all over. So basically some of the users are inside of our firewall. A lot of times the majority of our users are outside of our firewall, so we need to basically have stuff that will cater for that. Also the services. More and more companies are now using things like Salesforce, CRM Online, all of those different tools that live outside of our enterprise. So we've lost control of a lot of those things in terms of how we integrate with them, how we talk to them, things like that. Also with the IoT stuff, I don't know if you guys have looked much at the IoT stuff, but it has the ability to generate reams and reams of data. And a lot of that data is going to be in the cloud to start with, because basically we're going to use some of the tools from Microsoft to collect that data. And the other big thing is our computing resources are becoming more and more cloud-based. How many people in the room can get a new virtual machine spun up inside of their enterprise in 15 minutes? Okay, you own the keys to the kingdom, I'm sure, that you can do that. But most companies, it is a big challenge to do that. With Azure, I can go out, I can spin a machine up, and have it ready for me to use. And that could be a development environment even. If I've got an MSDN subscription, I can spin up a machine that already has Visual Studio installed on it. So all of those tools are ready for me. So that's why that Microsoft is concentrating on that hybrid integration model. BizTalk is not gone, but BizTalk is going to be part of that hybrid integration. So the components that make up the app services are our web apps. We've been using those for a while. Very nice way to put your web applications up in Azure. Got debugging and all that kind of nice features in there. The scale out, we can scale out however we need. We've got mobile apps. So if we're talking to our mobile devices. Now, we had API apps till about a week ago. And now it's web apps with some different configuration. So they had planned on doing it. I was at the MVP Summit at the first week of November, and they announced they were doing some work around that because previously an API app was a web API with a different set of configuration in front of it and a slightly different deployment model. So now, as of when I tested it last night, they're gone. You can still create them through a couple of back doors for a while, but they will be going away. So it's going to be web API, and also they're going to be introducing some stuff around the API management. So you're going to be able to publish APIs from anywhere and let the Logic app consume those. So then the other one is our Logic app. That is the workflow. That's basically how we take several web APIs and put them together into a workflow. So we're going to start off talking about the API app. So basically every time I say API app, we can put web API in there because basically that's what it is now. So basically it's web API based. It's always been web API based. It's just the deployment model has changed in the last week or so. There is a talk, if you're interested, they do a Logic Apps I/O talk about every month. And there's one scheduled for December the 3rd US time. If you go out to either on Twitter or on, there's a Facebook. If you look for Logic Apps I/O, there is a YouTube group on there, and that's how they push out their webcasts via YouTube. So you can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and watch the one from the States, or you can get up at 9 o'clock in the morning and watch the recording. So it's your choice. So basically, the API apps are leveraging all of that technology they already have in the Azure websites. So you can do the debugging the same way you do the website debugging, the deployment model. You'll even be able to have it to where you save your API app in source control and you can have that automatically publish out. Again, reusable components. Microsoft is going to supply a lot of components already pre-built. So there's going to be adapters for things. There's already adapters for things like Salesforce. There's a hybrid file connector so that you can actually take files from Azure through the service bus relay down on premise. So, and that's kind of the demo that I'm going to do later on. I'll talk through the demo a little bit later. They've also got one for SQL, so you can do through the Azure service bus relay. You can get down to your SQL server that's inside of your firewall. And basically, we've got some FTP ones, some SFTP, things like that. A lot of the different adapters that you would expect. And we've got API apps that will work inside of it, similar to an orchestration. But basically, they will do things like, for BizTalk side of things, they will do a map. They'll map from one XML document to another XML document. They have a JSON encoder-decoder that'll translate between JSON and XML and then back. So they have all those components already published out there for us. One of the things they're also trying to do is they're trying to establish a very strong marketplace. So they're going to have stuff that Microsoft supplies. There's also looking at vendors. So if you've got a product that you want people to be able to integrate with through the Logic apps, you can actually put a connector up there in the marketplace so people can use that connector to connect to your application. They're also helping that the community, particularly the MVPs, put a few of those up there. I've already done a couple of small ones. It just depends on how much the changes they've just made break my stuff. But a lot of, with the service bus messaging, you get a whole list of properties. And it's easy to copy a single property. It's not easy to copy all of the properties or a subset of the properties. So I've got a little API app that does that. And again, the other one they're looking at for a very strong group is the enterprise marketplace. So inside of your company, you can publish out these adapters so that everybody in your company can leverage that work. They don't have to do it themselves. And then you can control it. And hopefully that enterprise also kind of goes a little bit towards an ISV community also. So if you've got a customer, they can use some of the API apps that you build for their integration work. And I guess the big thing that they did when they moved away from BizTalk Services to the API apps and Logic apps, BizTalk Services was a silo in Azure of integration, where the API apps and Logic apps is designed to cut across everything in Azure. So that was the big mandate from on high in Microsoft, is they needed an integration technology that would work across everything, not just particularly replacing some of the BizTalk functionality, but working across. That's why everything in the API apps and Logic apps is JSON based. You can still do stuff with XML, but most of it's JSON based so that it interacts well with a lot of the other technologies. So we're going to go out and I'm going to do a little bit of a demo now on how we create an API app. So I've got Visual Studio 2015 here, and as of last night I've got the latest Azure SDK, so it's the 2.81 I think SDK. We're going to go in and we're going to do a new project. And again, it's a ASP.NET web application. Let me just grab the name I want to call it. We'll go, and everything falls into that ASP.NET web application. And if I go here and do a create, what we'll see is we get a second screen of what particular type of web application I want to create. And it's a little bit hard to read on that screen, but there is a Azure API app definition there. So we're going to pick that Azure API app definition and go ahead and create that. And basically it's looking for my subscription information. And let's go see. I need to pick my resource group I already have stuff in. And want to change its name. It'll be interesting if it lets me do that. So I'm going to create that now. And this is some of the stuff that's actually changed just in the last day or so, the way they're creating those. And to keep you from having to sit and watch me code, I've done a bunch of little NuGet packages that will inject a lot of the code. I'll kind of walk through what I'm doing in there. But the whole purpose of the demo is we're taking a client scenario that we had a customer that had external parties building software for them. And to get that software delivered on premises, somebody had to walk in with a USB key. That was the only way they could get it inside their network. So what I did is, how many people are familiar with Visual Studio Team Services? Or the VSO, but as it was called about 3 weeks ago. They changed the name of it. So basically what we're using is you go in and you create a work item. You add an attachment to that work item, which is the file you want downloaded. So it could be a zip file of your software. And then you mark that work item as committed. You save the work item. I'm using the service hooks from the work item in Visual Studio Team Services to send a service bus message to my service bus queue. And then when my Logic app starts, it will pop the message off the service bus queue, gets passed to the API app I'm getting ready to create here. That will go in and look at it. If it's a committed, it sends an email, creates an email, and then I use the Logic app to send an email. to someone that needs to approve that work item. Once they go into Visual Studio Team Services and approve that work item, that fires another message to the service bus. The service bus, then the Logic app picks that up, sees that it's been approved, then grabs the attachment out of the work item and uses the hybrid file connector to download that on premises through the hybrid file connector into their DMZ, and then their security people can scan it and then bring it into the network. So that's what the scenario is that I'm going to use for the demo. So now that I've got my API app created, what I'm going to do is, it puts a default controller in there, so I'm going to get rid of the default controller. I've got to add some NuGet packages, so I'll do the manage NuGet packages. And I'll go to, I just need to supply a password. I've got a private NuGet store. And no matter what I do, it still prompts me for the password. But I want to go just the normal NuGet.org, and I want to do, I need to update the JSON.NET, upgrade that to the latest version. Now, one of the other MVPs has created a library that makes it easier to expose your metadata from your API app. So I'll install that once this is done. So that's basically upgraded the JSON.NET. I'll go back to here. The package that he's created for the metadata is T-Rex, so I just need to do an install on that. So for my API app, I need to create an input model and an output model. Once this installs, I'll create an input, and that's basically taking the information that I need to go off to Visual Studio Online or Visual Studio Team Services and grab the attachment. So to keep from having to manage configuration in my website, everything gets passed as a parameter to the call. So I don't have any configuration that's static in the website. So I'll go in there now, and once that finishes installing, and then I'll install I've got a public NuGet package out there that defines the VSO work item. It's not called T-Rex though. So there's a VSO work item updated. I'll install that package. And again, what they did was, it's a JSON message they produce. So there's a website out there that you can paste your JSON into, and it will actually create a .NET class for you. So that's what I'm installing, is that .NET class that was created from the JSON. And the last one I'll install is the actual work item controller and my input and my output model. They're in my private. So I've got my demo work item update controller, and I need to install that. Now we'll create the input and the output model and my controller, and we'll have a look at that code in a second. That's really good. Okay. Okay, a slight hindrance there, but I have a way of fixing it. I'll let my NuGet subscription, my Get subscription expire, so I think they probably cleaned out my private repository. So, but I've got I've done this talk at a couple other places, so I'll go in here and I'll grab my work item controller, and I will drop that into the right spot in my project. So working and controller, I'll paste that in there, and then I need to go and grab in my models. I've got a, let's go look at that one. Got a input and output model here. And then I just need to go in here and add an existing item to my project. Under the controller, work item controller, and then add my models. So my input model, basically, I take everything in I need. I need the content of the service bus message. I need the content encoding type, so if I need to decode it. I've got the attachment status. What status do I want to download the attachment on? So I can change that in my Visual Studio Team Services. I could download it on committed instead of approved, but I pass all that information in. And then there's an email status. What status do I do the email on? And then I've got my VSO user and my VSO user token that I need to be able to use to access the Visual Studio Team Services. And then my output, basically I put out the work item status, so whether it was approved or committed, because I'm going to use that to make some decisions in my workflow of what path I go down. Then I've got the actual attachment, and it's a base64 encoded attachment. And then I've got the attachment file name. I generate the file name. I download the file from Visual Studio Team Services. I look at the file name there. Just to keep from overwriting the same file, I add a GUID in front of that so that I get a unique file name so I can run this as many times as I want. I also generate an email body. At the moment, the email body is only the JSON message, so it's not a really pretty email body, but it gets the message across that I've got a hold of that message. And then I've got the output type, whether I'm sending in an attachment or an email. And then in my work item controller, so there was a few issues with their JSON file that they produced. They had system dot and a couple of dots in their actual JSON file. When it created the class from it, it failed. So I've got 4 find and replaces that replaces the system dot with a system underscore so that I can actually serialize the message. I don't know why they did that, but there was 4 different ones that they had dots in that I had to replace with underscores because the class structure didn't like it. So, and let's go. And then what I do is I go look at the, make sure that the event type is a work item update. Then I go and look at, is it the email status or is it the attachment status? If it's the email status, I generate the email body. If it's the attachment status, I go out, call a routine to go out and download the attachment from Visual Studio Team Services, bring it back, do a base64 encode of that, and then output that as my API. Now, let's just see if I can get this to build. Okay, my build succeeded. Now what I need to do is do a publish. And so, okay, let's go back to the profile. So I had to change the way it was doing this. Last night it defaults to this Microsoft Azure App Services. And what I need to do is, there's some more options here, which is the classic Azure API. So they've got that around for a little while. And I'll select, I want it to automatically generate my metadata. And now it's asking me to find my existing one. So one of the things that I found that was easier when I was demoing to pre-create the API app, because it sometimes took a couple of minutes to create the API app in the Azure App Services. So I went ahead and created that, and then I'm just picking that one. That's going to download my publishing settings. The other thing I want to do is I want to set it to debug, because I'm going to show you how to attach the debugger to that. And then I can publish. Usually doesn't take too long to publish, but with all the changes they've been making lately, it could take a second to publish that out. No, it seems to be working all right. So that's basically got a custom API out there for me to use from inside of my Logic app. This error comes up because I've got it marked as internal, because I want to use it just inside of my API app. I don't want people to be able to externally hit it. So I can mark it as internal, and that's why when the publish tool tries to hit it, it fails. So let's hop back to the slides. So now what we're going to do is talk about the Logic app side of things. So the Logic app is a collection of API apps. Going forward, it's actually going to be a collection of web APIs that have a certain amount of Swagger markup, and eventually it will be published via the API management. So basically, anything that you can publish via API management, you will be able to consume via the Logic apps. And that really has some benefits, because that means I could have an API on-premise that I can define in API management, and then I can hit that directly from my Logic app. So I can have that hybrid integration mix very good. And it is a workflow. Currently, the workflow designer is left to right, which is a little bit hokey for a workflow designer. But at Connect 2015, about a week and a half ago, they demoed the vertical designer. So just like we expect in either BizTalk or Windows Workflow, it's a vertical designer that has a little bit better workflow feel to it. So the difference that we have now between our Logic apps and our existing technology is that everything in the Logic app is an API app or a web API. So with the older workflow technologies, you could create other things and use inside of there. So you could put some code blocks and things like that. There is a language, there's a workflow language, but it's really only for controlling how you're invoking the different API apps. They also have some different models. They have a push, a pull, a repeating, and a manual. So the repeating is I can tell it to go out every hour and try to download a file off of the service bus queue. Or I can tell it every minute or every second to go download. I can also have it to where I've got an HTTP endpoint, and I can hit it with an HTTP post. I can also have it manually. And a lot of people say, why would you want a workflow that's manual? What you might have is they have released a full SDK around this, and you can invoke a workflow through a set of APIs. So you might have another application, so say a web application somewhere that you need to start a workflow with. You can go and do that through an API. You can also have one Logic app launch another Logic app. So that case, that second Logic app would be manual, and that would automatically get started from that first Logic app. You have the debugging. So basically, we'll look at the debugging. It puts a lot of that information into the Azure Management Console, and they're working on pushing that debugging information through the, not the IoT, but the Event Hub, and be able to consume it with some of the application insight tools or Stream Analytics, any of those kind of tools. So they've got a demo out there right now, and they've added some just recently, but they had a demo where you put a shape in your Logic app that would capture all of the information about the Logic app and push it. They were going to make that a first-class citizen, so you just turn on some settings. So it's easier to do that. And again, it's extensible because I can create my own API app that sits in the middle of some of the Microsoft API. So let's go out and create a Logic app. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go out to the portal. I've already got an app service plan. So I've got an app service plan. Now, a little trick is that you can't stop an app service plan. So If you have a standard app service plan, you're paying about $60 or $70 a month for it. And if you only use it occasionally, that's a lot of money out of my MSDN subscription to use. So what you can actually do is you can go in and you click on the tier, the pricing tier, and when you're not using it, you mark it back to free. So it sets out there, it won't run, but if you're not using it, it sets it free for a while, and then I can change it back to standard when I need to use it. And you could even do it overnight if you wanted to. So basically, I've got my app service plan. Now, if you want to use app services in a VPN, you will have to use an app services environment, which has a minimum of 6 premium cores, which is going to be somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a month to get that VPN access. So it is, we've had some serious chats with the product team about why they did it that way. But what they did is the app service environment is built on top of a virtual network, which then you can do VPN, express route, all of those kind of things out of there. So we're going to go into the Logic app. I did find one little issue with the Logic apps when I was doing my demos, is that the first time I demoed it, I went to create a Logic app. I used the same name as the one I'd practice on, and it hadn't cleaned up the artifacts yet, so all of a sudden I had my demo completely done. So basically, I haven't tried it lately, but I'm just going to basically put a number at the end of it. It's using my BizTalk Bill 01, it's standard pricing, the resource group, my subscription, and it's running in the Australian East data center. I'm not going to go ahead and define the Logic app yet. I'm going to go ahead and just create it to start with. That basically will go set it all up. And then what I'll do is I'll go into the settings, and I will actually go in there and, yep, the Logic app's created. I can do a refresh. Click on that. That will bring up the Logic app. I will go into the settings, into triggers and actions. We have a blank service to start with, and when it finishes refreshing, I'm just going to create a Logic app from scratch. I'll talk in a second. There's a bunch of templates out there. Those templates are also going to be in the marketplace. So if you want to do something and you want people to use your template, you can create a template. There's templates right now for HTTP request response. So if you want to build that, you can start with that template. It'll put all of the API apps in there for you, and you just need to configure. I'm going to start from just scratch. Here's my Azure Service Bus connector. Click on that. It adds it to my Logic app. It's got a method called message available, so I click on that. I'm going to change it to every minute. So basically, that's going to go out every minute and check to see if there's a message on the service bus queue that I've pre-configured. Then I'm going to add my work item updated. API app. And basically, it's got a lot of parameters. So what we'll do in a second, it's got one method, which is get by input. So in my content here, what I can do is I can click the little ellipse, and I say I want the message available content. So that'll be the content of the service bus message. The transfer encoding, I'll just use the transfer encoding from that. Attachment status wants to be approved, and the email status wants to be committed. The VSO user, just go out here and grab the stuff that I need for that. And my token. And basically I go down and click the little green check. And that's now configured that. So that's enough. I actually could do some work right now with just that. I don't do anything with the output. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll add a Office 365 connector. And the Office 365 connector is going to ask me to authorize. And that's going to pop a dialog up and let me type my Office 365 credentials into that. There is a SMTP connector, and there's also a SendGrid connector, so if you want to use SendGrid. They found a little bit of an issue with the SMTP connector talking to SendGrid. That's why they created a SendGrid one. So now I've got several options with the Office 365. I want to send an email. And I'll send it to bill@chesnut.net. The subject is work item updated, and the body is going to be my email body. And then the next thing I'm going to add is my file connector. The file connector has been set up to go from use the Azure Service Bus Relay coming down to the development machine I'm running on. All of the demos I'm running is on a virtual machine running in the Southeast Data Center in Melbourne. So basically I've got that set up. And let's go here. And so what I want to do is I want to upload a file. When you set up the file connector, you give it a root folder. The file path is the file name, so I've just, and you can see that the UI needs a little bit of work because you can't see the ending of those. And I think I'll have to check and see which one it is. Nope, that's not it. It's got to be the second one. And yep, attachment file name, and then the first one will be the attachment. And the transfer encoding wants to be base64. They have made some changes in the last week about handling binary data better. So basically, I've done that. So now the only issue I've got is the fact that it will try to send an email and the file every time. So I haven't put any conditions in there. So what I need to do is I need to go to my Office 365 connector, and I need to add a condition to be met. So I got the condition out there in my Logic app. So basically the expression is that the output type is email. I'll add that, and then so that'll send it when it's an email. And I'll grab the other condition, which is when it's a attachment. And I'll go into my file connector and add the condition to the file connector. And I'll save that. And what we should see, if they haven't changed the designer too much on me in the last week or so, the file connector dropped below the Office 365 connector to basically specify that they were independent of each other. One or the other is going to run because they're looking at the same field. This is why I really don't like the left to right design. It'd be much easier to see in that vertical design. Now what I can do is I can hit save. My Logic app's been saved. What we'll do now is we'll go out to our Visual Studio Online. I've already got a work item there. It's got an attachment called sample.zip. I'll set its status to committed, and then I'll do let me just update something else in there. Do a save and close. We'll hop back to the Azure portal. I'll close that pane. Go here now, and we'll see there is a trigger history. So from the time I saved that, it would have started trying to find messages out there. And right now it's going to try to find a message every minute. It tried and didn't find one at 5:50 p.m., so it skipped. So basically, if we keep looking at that trigger history, it will try again. It'll also show the runs in here when it actually does a successful run. So it's actually started to run now. If we click on that, and that successfully ran. So it had one. That's interesting. It skipped both of the output steps. So how do we debug that? So let's go in there, and what we can do is we can go down here and look at the output for the service bus call. When it decides to refresh. So there's the message coming out, and that's the JSON message. Then we can go look at my work item updated code, and we'll basically then figure out, there's my input link. There's the data that got passed in. So approved, committed, and the token. And then we can look at the output link. And I've got the parameter wrong, I think. Let me just have a quick look. No, that should have been correct. So let me just go try. So that didn't. So okay. So now what we want to do is we want to see how we debug the API app. Yes. It's a good lead into the debug. So basically what we do now is we go out here into our Visual Studio. We'll go over here to our API apps and go into our, let's see, it's the app service plans. Where is let's do a refresh on the resources. Should have a logic app there. So there's my logic app. API apps are what I want to look at. So here's my work item updated. I can right click on that and I can say attach debugger. So when I first presented this at Ignite New Zealand, the internet went down at this point. So the debugger decided not to attach. So we'll see how it goes tonight. Once I get the debugger up, I'll drop another message in, and we can see that message come through. So, taking longer than expected. Looks like it hooked. It tried to launch the app, but that's fine. So what I'll do is I'll go back here, and what I want to do is I want to set some breakpoints. And then I'll go back out to my Visual Studio Online, and I'll open my work item. And I'll make an update to it, and I'll do a save and close. Go back to Visual Studio. It might take it up to a minute to kick that off because I've got that service bus running at a minute poll. And what we should see is it'll hop in there. That'll give us access to all of the input. So here we are. We're there. So here's my JSON content. It'll go down through there. I'll go ahead and go to the next debugging breakpoint. So the event type is work item updated. Then basically what I'll need to do is look at what the system state is. It's committed. Our attachment state is approved. If I scroll down through there, then I should get down to the email. So there's my event type is, oh, let's to there. So let's go. So it's into there now. So basically there's the status matched. So that's the, so I'm basically creating my email body. Let's see if I can figure out what's not working in that. No, we've got that. The result, make sure the result is blank. So obviously that didn't work. So it looks like I've got hit by the second one. I got hit by the change to VSTS. That it's not finding the attachment there. I could debug through that, but basically what it's doing, it's decided it couldn't find the result in the JSON file, so it couldn't find the right tag in that. There is our work item update, but it didn't create the body that it needed, so it made it blank without a result. So we continued. So, and one of the things we can tell in there is if we go back into the output here, we could see those links, and you'll see that there's no body. So you've got access to all of that information in there. And it's fairly handy to be able to go through that. So if we close that, and the one I found that is really beneficial is that actually the output of our trigger. So you can see the actual Visual Studio Online message. And most likely what they've done is they've updated the JSON path that's coming out of VSTS. So that's what's failing. So let's basically go back and hop into the slides. We've shown the debugging of the API app, and we figured out we've got a problem, but let's go ahead and go back into here. We can also look at those predefined flows. So they're going to be in the marketplace. So if we want to build one to do, say, if we're working in EDI, we want to be able to accept an 850 purchase order, we might use the EDI components to do that. So that's going to give us an extended level of reuse, and it's also going to be something that we could put into the marketplace as a vendor or as a community person. We've already done the debugging demo because I had to debug in there to figure out that it wasn't working. What I want to do now is talk about some of the tips and tricks around. And that's basically, the first one is the PowerShell. Underneath the covers, our Logic app is basically a JSON file. So if we hop back into our Logic app, go into the, close this down, go back to here and go into the all settings, go into the triggers and actions, and there's a code view button here. It's got to refresh the screen for me. And then basically it'll go into the code view. So basically here's the JSON file that defines my workload, or my work Logic app. So there's the trigger, and it's basically using a TFS integration service bus connector. There's the parameters about the connector. Here's the first action, which is my BizTalk bill VSO work item updated. The parameters. There's my Office 365 connector and my file connector. So basically, that's all of the information. At the moment, there isn't a way to start in the designer and then come back into a Visual Studio project. You either do Visual Studio project from start or designer. So there's no way, and it's, yes?
Is that Visual Studio project allow source control based management of that?
Yes, it does. Oh, but it's basically just a whole set of JSON files. So yeah, you can source control those. I've been asking them. I will show you a way to get some of that information out with some PowerShell commands. So if we go down, and I'll go ahead and start PowerShell, and I've got some PowerShell commands here. The first thing you have to do is you have to switch the PowerShell into resource manager mode. And they've deprecated that on me in the meantime. So we'll go in here and add Azure account, see if that can work. So logging in with my credentials. Okay, so there's my subscription. So now, if they haven't changed the commands too much on me, I can look at the items that are in my resource group. Of course not. Okay. Let's see if I can do that switch now. No, they've changed that. So basically, I've got a copy of the file out there that it downloads. So if I go out here into the downloads, or actually on the PC, and users, BizAdmin. Basically, here's the JSON file, and basically open with code. How many people are using Visual Studio Code? I really like it. If it decides to open, that is. So basically, this is the full. This is a little bit more than what we saw in the code view. This has got all the resource information around it. But if you go on down here a little bit, you'll see that there's our TFS integration service bus connector. So this has basically exported all that information into a JSON file. We could, if we were just working in the designer, we could put those in source control anyway. So we could basically just put that into a file folder and add that to source control if we needed to. So basically that's some of the PowerShell. The PowerShell, you do need to do a little bit of trickery at the end of it. So basically what you've got in that PowerShell, you go in there and use the resource name. That's the resource name. And then you convert it to JSON, and you have to do some character replacements at the end of it. And then you write it out to a file. Hopefully they're fixing some of that as they mature this resource manager side of things. So let's hop back to the slides. So the other way we can manage things is in our app services, is the Azure portal. So we've got our app services plans, we've got our resource groups, we've got our API apps, which now have been just web API, and we have our logic apps. So if we hop back into our Azure portal, we'll see that we can go look at our app service plans. I've got 2 app service plans. We can go look at our logic apps here. We can go, they used to have API apps. When you click on the API apps, it takes you to the new version of the API apps, which says to click on that. And for whatever reason, the API app that I deployed is showing up now. Last night it wasn't, so they've obviously fixed something. So basically that shows my API app. And then we can also, they've got another tab which is App Services. Oh, that's the same App Services tab. And if I had any websites or anything like that, they will all show up in that App Services tab. I can then also go up to my resource groups. So I can go to my resource group, and for some reason the resource groups proliferate when you do things. So I've got my BizTalk Bill 01, and that will show you all of the resources that I have in that particular resource group. So I've got a few things in that resource group, mostly the stuff around that demo. So basically that's what you can manage through that. They're working on the ARM template support so that you can do all of this in an ARM template. So you can configure your API apps, your logic apps, and everything in that, so that you can then, in Visual Studio, there is going to be a project type. So if I launch a new version of Visual Studio, and basically I'll go and stop the debugging in the background. So new project. And depending on where they put that now, there was the Cloud Azure Resource Group. And you can go in there and you can pick Logic App, or you can pick Logic App and API App. The project doesn't really have anything that compiles. What it's got some deployment scripts, some PowerShell scripts that are run to deploy that. It's got a JSON file for our Logic App and API app, and a JSON file for the parameters. And what you can do is you can actually go in there and create a dev test UAT parameters and have different values in there, so that when you deploy it, uses those parameter files to basically specify your subscription name and all of that kind of information in there. So basically, it is still preview. It is fairly rough around the edges. They have promised the new designer in the January timeframe. So that new designer out. And the new designer also requires the API management stuff, so it'll have that piece in there where you have to put your APIs behind API management. The designer is going to change it to where it's a top-down workflow, and it's going to have a little bit more visualization in terms of when you make decide shapes and things like that in there. The easiest way to start is to go out and have a play with it. It's been a little bit frustrating having plays with it because they keep changing things on you. But we do have a couple of customers that are already live in production on it, and it's working really well. So they're very small things that we're doing with it, but basically we're using that hybrid file connector to pull some files down for one of our customers, and that is working fine. It's been in production now for almost 2 months, and we haven't had any issues with it. So the big thing to do is to watch in January, and also go out to the YouTube site and look at Logic Apps IO, and have if you haven't been watching those monthly meetings they have a watch through those. They've got, like I said, they've got another one that's this week, December 3rd, U.S. time. So that's Thursday U.S. time, which will be Friday morning here. So there's my contact details, and I thank you very much.